All right, taking a look at Josh Winkowski, who certainly looks like he belongs in a big league rotation. You got Connor Siebold, who's been up and down a little bit here as of late. Cutter Crawford, meanwhile, very good in Monday's win, and that all spells some pretty good depth here for this Red Sox rotation as you look at some of the numbers. And, of course, John Tomase brought it up in the first segment of the show that you've got 80% of your starting rotation right now, who is technically not on the roster, injured reserve, whatever else. Lou Merloni, we got Tomase at Fenway as well. But, Lou, when you take a look at all this pitching depth, what does it mean for this team long term, and what does it do for them in the short term as well?
See, the question I have is, like, first off, I think general managers, organizations need to identify who's real and who's not. You know, you need to look at your rotation and sit there and say, okay, Brian Bayo's a keeper. Winkowski maybe is a keeper. Siebold, he's a swing guy. Crawford's a swing guy. And if there's interest out there and you could take one of them and you could fill a huge gap for a big league team because you still have others. You know what I mean? You can't hoard them all. They got a Lefty Walters down in AAA too on the IL that's legit. So they've got like 5 of these AAA arms that teams are going to be looking at, and it's sort of like, how can I use one of them, right, to go out there and add to this big league club? So I think that's the biggest key. Find out who you think is real and maybe move on from one of the other guys and fill a need.
Yeah, Tomase, you just look at this depth, and how do you handle that if you're Chaim Bloom?
Yeah, so here's my fear, Giles and Lou. Last year, you made one trade of a real prospect, Alder Ramirez, a righty, who you sent to Washington in the Kyle Schwarber deal. You know, the Red Sox were hesitant to include him in that deal, but they ultimately did. And I think it's fair to say you do not reach the ALCS without Kyle Schwarber. And I fear that, you know, we saw this with Ben Cherington, and I think we can safely say that we're seeing it with Bloom, where there's a real hesitation to deal any kind of prospect because, you know, the benefit of hitting on them in their mind is greater than the loss of, oh, we kept the wrong guy and he didn't pan out. With Lou, I would like to see them say, all right, you know, Siebold is okay or Crawford is okay, but we need something right now that those guys can go get us. And furthermore, we trust that we can develop the next Siebold, the next Crawford. Like, those guys aren't once-in-a-lifetime pitchers, organizational changing pitchers. So it's like, you trust that you can continue developing these guys.
Yeah, find the next guy, right? Just find someone else to step into that role. That's the same way I look at it. I also see this as possibly, you know what, you got kind of a changing of the guard here. We talked so much about Nathan Eovaldi, and I was beating the drum saying you got to sign Nathan Eovaldi to a new deal because what do you have as far as pitching goes at the start of the season? But here they are. They proved me certainly wrong with the fact that they've got other guys who can step in, and I think what this says is Nathan Eovaldi's probably not going to be back here next year, Lou.
Yeah, listen, I would agree, especially with some of these arms that they have. I do know that Chaim Bloom basically wants a second starting 5 down in AAA, and he essentially has it right now. So when you start talking about guys coming in here, and by the way, some of the names that we just mentioned, I don't even think it's going to take to go and get a guy like Daniel Bard or Robertson, like a rental. You know what I mean? I think they have enough down the minor league system to get guys like that. But when you start talking about these arms and implementing him to that staff next year and not re-signing Eovaldi or a guy like Duran in center field and not having to bring back a Kike or spend the kind of money that you did on the edges, right? You start saving a lot of money, too, if you start keeping some of these arms, which you could spend on your shortstop or your third baseman. Right? This is the goal, like to have these minor leaguers come up making league minimum, which allows you to spend on some of the other players to keep your talent. So it's a good position to be in.
Tomase, do you feel comfortable in that? Should that be one of the other? We talk about the trade deadline and everything else and trying to maybe trade off pieces and strengthen this team this year, but strengthening this team for the future would also be signing Xander Bogaerts or signing Rafael Devers to a massive deal, and you do have the freedom to do that if you're not paying your pitching staff an exorbitant amount of money.
Yeah, and I want to be careful when we say this because the Red Sox can afford those guys whether or not they have minor league arms. You know, like, I think sometimes, and I'm as guilty of this as anybody, we feed into the narrative of, like, the Red Sox need to save money here so they can spend it here. Like, let's take a step back and remember that we are talking about one of, you know, the 5 richest, most valuable franchises in baseball, practically in American sports. And so, you know, to act like they have to save here to spend there, I think feeds into this sort of ownership narrative that we've been hearing for a couple of years now and is part of why Bloom was brought in. all of that said, I have no problem if you're developing your own pitching from within. I mean, the Red Sox haven't been able to do that practically in our lifetimes outside of Bruce Hurst and Roger Clemens and 3 or 4 other guys. They've always had to go outside for their own pitches. So if you can start building that Tampa model here where you're producing your own arms and they are legitimate and they're getting here because you're developing them, that's the holy grail. That's what you're looking for.
Lou, do you also need to see over the next 17 games or the next couple of weeks here as you close things out before the All-Star break, do you need to see these guys also step up and do this against the Yankees, do this consistently against good competition? Because I love what we're seeing so far, but at the same time, is it too small of a sample size to really buy into, all right, this is what we have and this is what we know we have before we start trading guys off?
Yeah, listen, you go up against the iron. You know what I mean? It's just nothing but Tampa and New York. There's no soft landing spots. You know what I mean? Like Winkowski, I think, started against Baltimore, Detroit, and Oakland, right? But he's kind of kept that going. But I think those 3 teams he faced kind of gave him the confidence to know at least he could pitch in the big leagues, and he's carried it forward. So, yeah, would you like to see them? Yeah, but if they don't, I mean, if the Yankees beat up one of these kids, I'm not going to sit there and say he sucks. You know what I mean? It's the Yankees. Or even Tampa Bay if they happen to go out there and beat them. So you just want to see him compete, keep him in the ball games right now. You know, a guy like Bayo may have a higher ceiling. Well, I want to see more of Winkowski. You want to see more of them, but you're going up against the iron. Let's face it, once you get past this stretch, you know, other than your own division, there's really not much in the American League, right, that you kind of fear. So.
Tomase, who do you give the most credit to for the development of these pitchers?
I mean, to me, it's got to be Bloom, right? Like, you brought him in from Tampa because this is what the Rays did. The Rays constantly churned out, you know, really Cy Young caliber pitching. And you brought him here to do that. And a lot of the guys that are pitching well, I mean, Winkowski, he went out and got, but it's like Bayo was already here. You know, he went out and got Seabold, but Thaddeus Ward was already here. So it's like a lot of guys were here, and he is unlocking them. Whatever that program is, it is clearly working. I think one general thing you can say is the Red Sox have been very good at determining what doesn't work for a pitcher. You know, like even Jeffrey Springs, the guy who started tonight for Tampa, who they signed a couple years ago, or Waka. It's like, you know, your cutter doesn't work, get rid of it. So I think they're very good with their young guys at doing that kind of thing, eliminating pitches and focusing on what they do well.
Yeah, we make fun of analytics an awful lot. You know, we talk about how you got to have that balance. But when you look at what they're doing with this pitching staff, you know, as you just mentioned, eliminating pitches, whether it's Walker getting away from his cutter, then implementing it maybe here and there, right? Or guys down in the minor leagues and saying, okay, you know, Bayo, let's turn 96, 95 four-seamer into 95 sinkers and just let it play in the middle of the zone. You know, get rid of the curveball, turn it more into a slider. These little adjustments, based on analytics, based on video, you know, arm slot, all these other things are the reason why you're seeing these guys develop at such a high level. So we can make fun of it at times, but we often don't give them enough credit when it works.
All right, meanwhile, let's talk about Chris Sale now because he might be helping the Red Sox out pretty soon here. He's going to make another rehab start on Wednesday. Made one last week with Portland, and after the game had this to say when asked about his vaccination status and whether or not he'd be with the team in Toronto at the end of September.
I just had a lot of fun. Let's not ruin that, all right? I'm enjoying this process. I appreciate being where I'm at and what I'm doing. Today's today. Tomorrow's going to come. We'll figure that out then, man.
All right, let's do a little gut reaction. And here's the thing, too. You got to keep in mind that was right after the Red Sox had lost that game on Tuesday to Toronto where they didn't have Tanner Houck. And it was one of the most demoralizing losses of the season. Chris Sale almost always says the right thing, John Tomase. Almost always. This one, though, I don't know how he wasn't prepared for the question at least and have some sort of stock answer ready to go.
Yeah, and you're leaving out the most important part, which was that Alex Cora had come out that day and said, you know, I'll bet you $1 or whatever it is that our vaccination status won't be an issue when we go back to Toronto in September. So that just opens the door for the questions. Well, we know who the unvaxxed guys are, so are you going to be there or are you not going to be there? And Chris Sale was the biggest unknown in that group because unlike Duran and unlike Houck, who we had talked to during the season, the last time Sale addressed anything vaccination related was in spring training. So it was an obvious question. I don't know why he got so offended by it, but, you know, it was certainly a misfire.
Yeah, let's face it. I mean, it's an awkward question when you're not vaccinated, right? If you are, you just say, yeah, I'll be there. But you're right. This really came off of Alex Cora saying that we're good. So you figured, okay, so you're going to have Houck, you're going to have Duran, and then the big question mark was, is Sale on board as well? Like, I could have seen Tanner Houck watching that game, or Jared Duran watching that game, and actually texting Alex Cora and be like, sorry, my bad, I wasn't there. After watching a blown save, a game we could have won, you know, I'm going to get vaccinated. Maybe that's what led Cora to say it, but the question was always about, you know, really about Chris Sale as well. So he didn't exactly answer it. I don't know what the future holds for Chris Sale, if he's going to be available or not. But that final week of the season, you're in Toronto, and God forbid you get that wild card game in Toronto. You know, whoever's got the higher seed gets every single game. You'd hate to not be able to have him pitch in that series.
Yeah, I guess they can try to figure it out because he's a starting pitcher, so it's not like, you know, Jaron Duran, who's at this point an everyday player, or Tanner Houck, who you need to have available almost every day. By the way, some breaking news, Hansel Robles DFA'd to make room for Brian Bayo on the roster as he makes his first start tomorrow. Let's quickly get to some comments here from Josh Winkowski over the weekend after he pitched at Wrigley for the first time. Said it was a little underwhelming. Fenway has a presence to it. I really didn't get that here, to be honest. I said to my mom last night, this place is very stock standard. John Tomase, gut reaction.
I've been to Wrigley. I think it's kind of a dump. However, if the Cubs are a better team, I think the atmosphere would have been better. He might have had a different feel. If
you said that about Dodger Stadium, I would understand, but you can't say that about Wrigley, right? You can't do Wrigley, it. Dodgers standard, whatever. Wrigley, that's special.
Wrigley or Fenway, Lou?
Fenway, easy.
Yeah. Tomase, same? Yeah, he says Fenway. He's standing in Fenway. Look at that. Let's look at some of the lights on for him back there.